Hello everybody and welcome. This is Redesigned for Resilience, transforming your business into a business inspired by nature. So you've already stepped through the very first step of the design spiral, or the identify stage. So by now, or at the end of that step, you should have a list of verbs or verb phrases that represent things that you want your design to do. And now we're on to the translate step. So translate comes after identify in this sequence. We've got identify and then translate, and translate's needed to get into the discover phase. Okay, so in the translate phase, we translate our design challenge, or the functions of our design challenge, into biological terms. Some people in the biomimicry world call that biologizing your question. Basically, we want to ask the question, how does nature perform this function? We also translate any other design parameters or the conditions that you came up into biological terms. It's this step where the designer begins to interface with the biological world. Okay, so the point of the translate step is to translate the functions and context or conditions that you came up with in the identify stage into biological terms. So it helps in this to ask, how does nature, quote, perform that function? So in the brackets here, perform that function, that's where you stick in your verb or your verb phrase. So we would talk about the chair example, how does nature cushion? So if that sentence makes sense, where you plop your function, that verb or verb phrase, into those brackets, then you know you've successfully translated. So if I said, how does nature make a chair? Well, that doesn't exactly make sense, does it? So you know you're not quite there yet. So you should have those. So that sentence should make sense. You can also try something more specific. How does a bumblebee cushion? Okay, well that starts to make sense. You could ask that question. So in the translate phase, you want to make sure you get those functions in a form that would make sense to a biologist. It can help in this stage to try asking the question in different ways. You can consider habitat conditions that reflect your business conditions. So for example, we talk about being in a growth phase. So consider habitat conditions that are in a growth phase. And you can also, at this stage, it's a little early, but you can start pondering how nature's principles translate into business principles. So we'll officially do that when we get to the evaluate stage, but it's kind of nice to start thinking about them now too. Okay, so you've identified your function, the purpose, the role, the use of those verbs, and then you're going to ask, how does nature perform that function? And you might want to rephrase it by saying, how does nature not do that function? So look at opposites. That'll help you get your head around the verb phrases that we're talking about. When we're talking about the habitat conditions, you can think of, say, climatic conditions like wet, dry, cold, hot, high or low pressure, whether it's really highly variable or really stagnant. You can think about resource flows. So is it a high resource, fast, sort of dynamic environment, or is it really slow, more analogous to, say, an Arctic condition? And you can consider social conditions. Is it highly competitive? Is it highly cooperative? Is it really dispersed, or is it really dense? And again, we can think about temporal conditions. Is it highly dynamic, or is it more static? Is it growing? Is it aging? Is it mature? Is it in a startup phase? So in the translate phase, you're going to end up with a series of again, verb phrases, but in this time they're going to make sense in biological terms. So sometimes they're pretty much already there and this stage goes really quickly. Other times it takes a while to translate from business terminology into biological terminology. And again, like in the identify step, this is a really neat opportunity to expand your thinking, to diversify your thinking, and add creativity into your thinking. Okay, so let's take a look at what that might look like. We're going to continue to follow along with this, the design challenge of designing a new vacation policy. So if we came up with that list of functions, if you remember. So if we translated those functions into biological terms, what they might look like is refresh, rejuvenate, cycle, and cycle as a verb, to respect, to communicate, adapt, accommodate, self-manage, sustain. So you could ask, how does a bumblebee rejuvenate? I don't know the answer, but that would make sense. That question makes sense in that particular form. Okay, so again, this could be a really easy step, and it might take you just a few minutes, or it might be pretty challenging. As far as conditions go, growth phase, many new diverse organisms, diverse conditions, some grouped together, some isolated, some traveling. Main population is centralized. So you can see that was a pretty easy translation from business terms into biological terms. Okay, whoops, sorry. So in order to do your this next step, I'm going to have you do a fun activity. Again, it's helping you shift into ecological thinking, and simply you're going to take a hike. So as you translate, or in order to translate from the business terminology into biological terminology, you're going to go for a walk or take a hike. So if you're in a beautiful outdoor place, that's fantastic. If not, you can simply go outside, and what you're going to do is either as individuals or ideally in pairs, go for a walk and discuss how you're going to translate the business terms into biological terms. And when you get back, you'll write them down. Okay, so go ahead and pull out your, if you haven't done so already, your biomimicry design spiral adapted for business, and go to the translate phase, follow along, and then go ahead and give it a go. And when you're done with that, next up is a discover phase. Okay, thanks for listening, and have fun with that, and we'll see you in the discover phase.